Welcome to Pastor Ed's study. You may hear some moaning and groaning in the background. That is just our ancient dog S'more sleeping here on his bed in the study. For today, we're looking at 1 Corinthians 2 and something I'm not going to really touch on in Sunday morning sermon, but is important to have in the background, is the concept that we find in Scripture called the fullness of time. The idea is that God sent Jesus at just the right time when the world was ready for the truths and the truth that he would bring and be and live and die and rise again. We find this in Scripture, not in Corinthians, but actually in Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. And Paul is kind of the epitome of the fullness of time. Paul was raised in Tarsus, a Roman city with a lot of Greek culture, and he was also steeped in Jewish truth, and all of these were important in the fullness of time. First of all, Greek philosophy had come to the point where it understood, and God had developed in this Greek philosophy the ability to understand the spiritual world in relationship to the physical world. There's it's either Plato or Socrates uses an allegory called the cave allegory for understanding the relationship between the physical and the spiritual worlds. I've actually used this in sermons, and I'll just review it for you really quickly. In the cave allegory, humans are born in the cave, chained down and facing the back wall of the cave. Behind the humans is the entrance or exit from the cave that leads into the world of light, into the spiritual world. And from time to time, people from outside the cave will pass food into the cave. They will speak truth into the cave, but the only way that humans have to interpret this spiritual world are the shadows that play out on the wall in front of them, the back cave wall in front of them. And what is really needed is someone to come from the world of truth outside the cave into the cave and set those who live in the cave free so that they can go out into the world of truth. Greek philosophy understood that the ultimate source of truth was spiritual, moral, and came from outside the physical world. Very important. You can see how Christian truth works with that. Jesus said, I know the Father because I have seen the Father, and I have come from the Father into this world. He said, I am the way, the truth, come into the world. And that was a very complementary concept to go with Greek philosophy. Along with this, Paul was a Roman citizen, and the Roman Empire provided a government that went beyond Greek city-states and all the fighting that went with them, and actually gave a period of peace, we call it Pax Romana, that prevailed around the Mediterranean Sea, which we know touches the continents of Europe, of Asia, and of Africa. So God's truth could spread out into those three continents very easily because of the Pax Romana. Roman law and government provided a stability to the region, also provided roads, which were marked out, were mapped, and gave easy ways for truth and ideas to travel between continents. And finally, into the fullness of time, we have Jewish truth, which developed around the Messiah, which also had the Septuagint, which was the Greek translation of the Old Testament that had come into being just a bit before this time. Now, when Paul came to Corinth, this is getting back to 1 Corinthians 2, he didn't draw on any of his knowledge of that stuff. Tarsus was a city up there with Alexandria, Egypt, and other great centers of learning. So we see in other books, and actually in Corinthians, Paul is going to do this. He can quote Greek philosophy and Greek poets because he learned this there in Tarsus. He was also a Roman citizen by virtue of living and being born in Tarsus, which we see him take advantage of. And then we know that he went from a Jewish family to Jerusalem to learn about Jewish truth as found in the Septuagint, which he quotes lots of times. Back to Corinth. Sorry about that aside. When Paul first came to Corinth, he didn't draw on any of that fullness of time stuff like he did in Athens or in other venues. Instead, he let the uniqueness of Jesus the Christ crucified stand on its own in the world of ideas. But now that he has come back to the Corinthians through this letter, he's next stepping the congregation, okay? They've gotten Jesus Christ crucified. That truth has been working in their lives. Now they need to go on into some of this Greek truth that God built in there, so that they can learn about spiritual truths taught by the Spirit that comes from the spiritual world where truth lives and wants to then directly impact their lives. Paul said, listen, the power of the message that I brought to you was in the Spirit's power from the Spirit's world, and the fact that he is working out moral and spiritual truth in your lives. That's the evidence. And that's how the fullness of time meets up with 1 Corinthians 2, which we'll be looking at this week. Thanks for stopping by my study. Hope this is helpful. Hope you're able to make it out either in person or through Facebook Live on Sunday morning to see how this all develops and plays a part in Sunday morning's message. Hope you enjoy a great week with the Lord. Again, thanks for stopping in. Bye.